Welcome to episode 43 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest insight scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. So let's get started with my first topic. Today, I participated in a Nokia Capital Markets Day. It started at 7 a.m. my time, so I needed lots of coffee, but it was great to tune in. Their CEO spoke to a number of things, and they had the heads of each of their business units speak to a number of topics as well. You know, from my perspective, I thought Pekka, their CEO, did a great job in articulating their strengths in fixed wireless access, optical, private wireless, and Open RAN. I also liked what he focused on with respect to aligning customer and partner to focus on best of breed solutions versus end to end. So historically, Nokia's focused on soup to nuts. And honestly, that's not the way a lot of operators purchase infrastructure. They typically leverage multiple vendors and suppliers for not only continuity of supply, but also from a cost perspective. So I think this is it's a divergent strategy for them. But under his leadership, I think it's the right thing to do. And then, finally, I like the way that he summarized his strategic plan, which was reset, accelerate, and scale. And it's no secret that the company did announce a pretty major reduction in force. I was contacted by Matt Kemko from SDX Central this week to get my insight on that, and really. It's just a natural progression given where the company needs to retrench and invest in things that they're very strong in, such as private networking and Open RAN. So, and there was also an announcement that came out today between AT&T and Nokia on CBand. So I thought I might toss it to you, Anshel, and let you take our listeners and viewers through that.
Yeah, so Nokia signed a deal with AT&T. It's a 5-year deal for Nokia to supply equipment to AT&T specifically for the use in the C-band spectrum, and it'll be utilizing Nokia's massive MIMO antenna solutions, their macro remote radio heads, and their next generation AirScale baseband equipment. So it's a good deal for Nokia because I think they've needed to get big wins like this.
Sure.
I think for AT&T, it's going to be a big opportunity to scale out its C-band network and its band. And I think they're not going to be the only ones. I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more C-band deployments using Nokia.
Right.
So we'll see what happens in the long term, but things may start to change for Nokia when it comes to the big three in the US.
Yeah, no, I agree. And what's the timing on AT&T's deployment there?
I believe the first phase will start happening in the latter part of 2021.
Okay.
As the spectrum becomes available. I believe AT&T got 40 megahertz out of the 100 that was in the A block.
Right.
And Verizon got the 60 hertz of that. So
Yeah.
AT&T will start rolling out 40 megahertz at the end of this year. So they do have a reason to be announcing this deal now in anticipation of the spectrum being available at the end of the year.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, AT&T is off to the races there. So let's move to your first topic this week. And you want to talk about some new mid-price point Samsung phones.
Yeah, so this week, Samsung had yet another unboxed event. This event was much more targeted on the mid-range and low end of its devices, as opposed to the S-series flagship phones. So everyone's familiar with the S21, the Note 20, those top end, fairly expensive phones. But they also have very popular mid-range, which is the mid-range device A-series. They've actually came out with these A-series devices last year and kind of really built out a very comprehensive 5G offering. This year, they're kind of refreshing those A-series devices with the new A52 and new A72, but they're also introducing the A52 5G, which is a very affordable, about $400 5G phone with triple cameras and all the normal expected high-tier device capabilities, and it's using Qualcomm Snapdragon processors rather than Nokia than using this Samsung Exynos chip. So it's an interesting announcement, and I think it'll help Samsung grow in the mid tier, which is where a lot of its competitors have been succeeding.
Yeah, and obviously these are 5G enabled phones, and this is just a proof point to something that we've talked about quite often on our podcast, that Qualcomm is developing a whole line of chipsets and modems that are going to support that entry level, that mid range, and that high end range, right?
Yeah, and also what's interesting is not all of these phones are 5G. So the regular A52 is 4G, and the regular A72 is 4G. So not all of these devices are 5G. However, they do have the potential to have 5G models down the road, which I believe they will. And they have all of the specs and features you would expect from a top end phone. It's just they don't have the top end SoC. They don't have, and they don't all have 5G.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Cool. Well, let's move to my second topic this week. I want to talk about Airspan Networks. They have a pretty interesting history. So they've been around for about 20 years. They were focused on that WiMAX standard, if you recall that, Anshel. And when that, when basically the room cleared on WiMAX, they pivoted to developing LTE small cell solutions, and the rest is history. And so this week there were a couple of announcements. One, I don't know if you follow the stock market and these special acquisition, special purpose acquisition SPACs, right? So there's a SPAC, ironically, with the initials NBA. It's not professional basketball. It's New Beginnings Acquisition Corporation. And so the news was around the fact that SPAC and Airspan are going to merge, and they're going to create a new ticker symbol for the combined company called MIMO. Kind of like that, pretty clever. And what it's going to do, it's going to allow the new entity to tap into almost $170 million in funding, so that they can develop 5G solutions. I mean, Airspan has been, again, very focused on small cell. They partnered with Sprint to develop their Magic Box before the T-Mobile merger. Airspan also acquired Mimosa Networks that provides fixed wireless access solutions for WISPs. And the company also has a line of CBRS certified solutions as well to support private networking. So from my perspective, this provides equity to the company. They don't have to go through a traditional IPO process, which is one of the benefits of a SPAC. And it gives them this revenue that they can invest in 5G. So I think that puts a lot of momentum, behind the company. They're already well positioned. The other announcement this week was an announcement around Open RAN with Rakuten, surprise. And so Airspan is going to supply basically virtualized hardware, software, and infrastructure blueprints to help extend the capabilities of Rakuten's Open RAN deployment. And so, from my perspective, the company has lots of different, opportunities to really go expand into. And I think Airspan is a company you want to keep your eyes on. Any thoughts?
No, I think it's interesting. I think MIMO is an interesting ticker for them.
Yeah.
And them going, public via SPAC and merging with another entity makes sense. We'll see if it's kind of the trend right now. But I don't really have that much to add on this topic specifically.
All right, cool. Well, let's move to your second topic this week. And you want to talk about Huawei and 5G royalties.
Yes. So earlier this week, Huawei had an IPR event where they kind of said that they are going to start charging a lot of device makers, for the most part, royalties on their patents, similar to what Ericsson and Nokia and Qualcomm already do. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense in the sense that Huawei is one of the leading companies in the world when it comes to developing new 5G technologies. Yeah. And it makes total sense that they would have a lot of patents in their portfolio related to 5G devices, because they, one, are developing both the network and the devices. And there's probably a lot of things in there that they're the creators of. So I think that them going after these 3,000 5G patents that they have, and whatever the number is for the standard essential patents, which are called SEPs, once they start asking for licensing fees, I have a feeling there are going to be some lawsuits involved, because that's just normal how it happens, and some negotiations that will occur. So we probably won't hear of Huawei's intent to sue any of its non-paying royalty holders until, let's say next year, once they've already had some, negotiations in place, and whatever negotiations have fallen apart. I've seen a lot of these patent, negotiations and disputes in the past. So we'll see what happens in terms of who decides to license and who decides not to, and who, wants to fight Huawei. Yeah. But Huawei said that they were going to put a $2.50 cap on the licensing fees that they're going to charge for these patents. So they're not going to be very expensive. And I expect that this may potentially raise the price of devices somewhat, because no one's been paying these yet. But I think it will be interesting to see how device makers approach this.
Yeah, well, I can't fault Huawei for doing this. They invest an incredible amount of their annual revenue back into R&D. I think over their last fiscal year, it was close to $20 billion US, and on a base of 100 billion in gross revenue. So they're certainly up there, with the biggest technology companies in the world. And and like you mentioned, they're one of the most prolific patent filers. Not that patent counting is any indication of innovation from my perspective, but you're right. They contribute quite a bit to 5G. They contribute quite a bit in the open source community as well. Some might argue the depth of that, but certainly, it's no surprise to see this news coming. And to your point, it'll be interesting to see how this really sort of affects the bill of materials moving forward. But we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll report back as things develop. But let's move to my third topic for the week. And I want to talk about a low and mid-band spectrum auction that occurred in the United Kingdom. So, and it was interesting, the amount of money that was raised, 1.4 billion pounds. Now, I know translated to dollars, that gets you into the $3 billion, dollar range. But I was struck thinking that, we just exited the CBand auction that raised 82 plus billion. Maybe the UK is being a lot more practical and not trying to fill the government coffers. What do you think?
I think that they probably have a better relationship with the operators. And they've probably had a discussion about what's fair. And I think that they have probably had this discussion where the operator said, you can charge us what you want, but if you charge us too much, we won't be able to roll out 5G fast enough. So I think they had a much more agreeable stance in terms of this auction. That said, it seems like there was only 200 megahertz of spectrum being auctioned. Is that right? It was about 200?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so there wasn't that much spectrum being auctioned off, especially since some of it was in the 3.6 gigahertz band. But in general, it seemed like it was a lot of low band and mid band, which is going to be necessary for good 5G coverage.
Yeah.
I just think that a lot of these operators have spectrum, and they want to obviously fill whatever gaps they have. And they all kind of just agreed probably that they're not going to run up an $81 billion bill.
Make it crazy, yeah. Now, there's also news this week. You and I were talking before we got started today on some mid-band assets that are tied to the global harmonization standard, right? So you want to give us an overview of that?
Yeah, so in October, the FCC is expected to roll out another spectrum auction. They just completed one, and we're going to have another one in October. And that one in October is going to be targeted at the 3.45 to 3.55 band of spectrum, which is a big deal because that is essentially in the 3.5 gigahertz harmonized global 5G band. So we can hopefully have devices in the world that will be able to work globally at 3.5 gigahertz everywhere in the world. Obviously, there's not going to be the same amount of spectrum in every place. You're not going to have necessarily the same speeds everywhere, but the idea of having 3.5 gigahertz as a globally harmonized 5G band is a big deal because it just
Yeah.
allows people to travel around the world and have their devices work on other networks without needing to have every band in the universe supported.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's going to make, that experience, that roaming experience that much better, especially for folks like you and I, that once we put COVID hopefully in the rearview mirror by mid-year, we'll be back on flights to Europe and Asia and all over the place. So cool. So let's roll to your third topic this week. And I know you've been doing a lot of writing on Forbes, and you've published two in a series of the state of 5G. So would love to hear some highlights from those first two articles you've written on Forbes.
Yeah, so it's a very long article. There's literally no way I'm going to be able to summarize it. But what I will
Get
say
the
is
highlights.
it originally started as a 6,000 word article and it became two 3,000 word articles.
Yeah.
Basically, part one, which was already published last week, covers the state of 5G networks, modems, and RF. And then part two, which published this week, covers devices, standards, and what to expect in 2021 and beyond.
Mhm.
So I kind of cover mostly a US-centric view, but there is a little bit of global views on that. No one person can fully comprehend the entire global 5G landscape. It's just not happening. So especially not in a 1-2-parter. So the way I look at it is I kind of look at where we are today, what that means for devices, what is the state of standards, and what is the 6-month delay going to mean for the industry, and what are the operators' plans for rolling out spectrum and devices and what to expect. And I kind of have really gone in and found the most up-to-date information from every operator, every device maker, all of the latest devices. The Samsung A series did not make it. The announcement was after publication, couldn't squeeze it in. But you have it here. Go check it out. It's on Forbes. It's a 2-parter, and I highly recommend you read it. It's a good one. I spent quite a lot of time on it, so hope you guys enjoy it.
Yeah, I scanned through it. It was, quite comprehensive. It's a great job. And for our listeners and viewers, it's quite easy. If you just Google Forbes More Insights and Strategy, you'll find our landing page. You'll find a lot of things that I've written on 5G, as well as these two articles that Anshel is speaking to as well. So, hey, buddy, another great podcast. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to reach out to us and provide a special or specific topic about 5G they would like for us to cover on the podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Will Town Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sag. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.